Hello, my name is Melissa Rodriguez. I am pursuing a Master of Arts in Education degree because I plan to become a math teacher, which will allow me to contribute to the growth of my community. I have always had an immense love for math, more so than any other subject. During high school, I spent many hours tutoring friends and acquaintances that were experiencing difficulties in their math classes. I truly wanted them to see the beauty in math. The Principles of Interdisciplinary Learning and Teaching class has really helped guide me on my path to pursuing a career in education by giving me an overview of the educational system. It is interesting to see how the educational system has evolved throughout the years. The traditional education style with the teacher standing at the front of the classroom is becoming more outdated, and there is now a trend leaning towards a more progressive approach which looks at the diversity in how students learn. This knowledge will help me when I teach math because I will encounter a wide variety of students, so it is critical for me to have the constant awareness that each student may require an alternate way of being taught a lesson. This class also broadened my perspective through the reading by Moran on interdisciplinarity. I am an artist and would love to work with an art teacher to figure out ways to utilize art concepts in my math class and vice versa, such that the students grasp math through a more visual perspective. Math can be a challenging subject and many students are visual learners, so combining math with art could strengthen the students' understanding. In this digital story, I will be discussing the four main objectives for this class. The first objective is the recognition of the socio-political nature of education. The second objective is the explanation of key aspects of foundational theories. The third objective is the application of key theories to diverse educational contexts. The fourth objective is the assessment of how key foundational theories address diverse learners. Learning about the socio-political nature of education has been very eye-opening and mind-broadening. The social justice module, which included Golden's historical overview of education, showed me that there are still students being educationally marginalized for multiple reasons, which is resulting in educational inadequacies for these students. According to Jean Anion, there is a hidden curriculum that affects the education process in schools. She looked at social class and determined that it is actually based on one's relationship to society. In Anion's review of the working class school system versus the wealthy school system, she noted significant differences in the curriculums that ultimately indicated that students at the wealthy school system were given more liberty to make their own decisions. Anion believes that these different educational approaches in each school system can cause students to have very different relationships to society. Paulo Freire discussed the dehumanization aspect of those that have been oppressed by social injustices in education. He believes that the relationship between the oppressors and the oppressed can only be healed by a mutual process of both parties returning to humanity. The oppressed need to be active participants in the creation of the pedagogy that will set them free. The first stage of the pedagogy is when the oppressed acknowledge that they are oppressed and then make the changes needed for liberation. The second stage occurs when the changes have been implemented and the pedagogy is for all people, not just the oppressed. It really disturbs me that there are injustices that exist in our current educational system, such as the achievement gap described in depth by Ladson Billings and the significant curriculum differences between the schools that have little funding versus schools that have a lot of funding. Educators need to be aware of these injustices and strive to correct these issues because students are being affected and we need to take care of all of them, not just some. In order to have social justice in education, there needs to be a strong foundation on relationship understanding and a liberating pedagogy that is embraced by both educators and students. This directly relates to teaching math because the relationship between the teacher and the student is critical to the learning process. When the relationship is based on mutual respect and understanding, the students will feel more comfortable asking questions and the teachers will be able to address the questions more freely. B.F. Skinner believed in the learning theory of behaviorism, which encompasses that behavior is determined by conditioning. Skinner created the theory of operant conditioning that entails looking at the way consequences of the behavior reinforce the behavior. Jean Piaget was a strong advocate for the learning theory of cognitivism, which looks at the mental processes of students. He viewed the acquisition of knowledge as a spontaneous process that was contingent on the internal activity of the student. Knowledge is built on operations that enable the student to gain a better understanding of an object and to grasp the foundation of what is occurring, whether it is a mathematical equation or a specific process being taught in biology class. Learning is brought about through situations which help construct logical structures internally in a student. The student uses internal active processes of equilibration and self-regulation to facilitate the learning process. Piaget believed that the relationship between development and learning was one of assimilation. Lev Vygotsky supported the learning theory of social constructivism. He did not see an association between development and learning as Piaget did, and rather saw them as being independent of one another. Vygotsky saw learning as an external social process that required active students and active educators. The developmental process was thought to come after the learning process, so it was possible to have a lag between the two processes. This lag contributes to the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. An example of ZPD is a 9-year-old student that has the mathematical ability of a 7-year-old student. Lav and Wigner supported the theory of situated learning, which encompasses an approach called legitimate peripheral participation. This approach views the learning process as a result of engagements in socialization. Learning through different social settings requires constant active participation. Thus, the active participant is constantly in a state of learning, evolving, and becoming. The participant will also engage with other community members such that the knowledge that the participant has gained is somehow transmitted or communicated to the community. Papert and Harrell were strong advocates for the learning theory of constructionism. The constructionism theory views the learning process as something that occurs when the students create constructions or models pertaining to the lesson being taught. Several examples were used to show different ways of how art and math can be combined and used to engage students to learn about math. Malcolm Knowles supported the adult learning theory, which looks at andragogy as a new theory to apply to adult learners. The andragogical theory is based on the premises that the individual transitions from being dependent to becoming independent and self-reliant. The experiences of the individual are utilized during the learning process, and continued education is contingent on what the individual needs to learn for different jobs. It is fundamentally important for the educator to understand the community that exists where the school is located and the diversity of the student population. By being able to connect with each learner, the educator can strengthen the student-teacher relationship, which will give students more ability to flourish because the students will feel more comfortable to ask questions and seek guidance. Skinner's concept on behaviorism and reinforcement has a large role in teaching, from primary and secondary schools to higher education. When learning math, a student's confidence in being able to work and understand a problem is critical. It is important to reinforce the student with positive feedback when they are able to figure out a problem. This additional reinforcement will help the student to gain confidence in facing more challenging problems in the future. Piaget's theory of cognitivism can be readily seen in primary schools through the use of visual aids. The students are actively interacting and exploring what is being taught. An example of this would be using foam letters to teach the students about the alphabet. Since the alphabet is the building block for language, it is critical that the students learn the alphabet prior to learning how to write. Vygotsky's social constructivism theory is evident from primary schools to higher education. It is imperative for math educators and educators overall to know where their students are developmentally. Educators should be checking in with their students daily to see how they are doing with the current lesson and to ensure that the student thoroughly understands the information. Skinner's behaviorism theory is applicable to teaching students with disabilities because it promotes the educator to use positive feedback with the students in order to strengthen the behavior that is needed to be successful in an inclusive classroom. Harrower gave extensive information on the debate of inclusion versus segregation for children with severe disabilities. I personally think that schools should have inclusive classrooms because students, both disabled and not, will grow from their social interactions with one another. Piaget's theory of cognitivism operates on the idea that the student should thoroughly grasp a lesson before moving on to the next lesson, which can be readily seen in any math subject. This would benefit all learners because it will ensure that they have the basic knowledge prior to advancing to the next level. Vygotsky's social constructivism theory was applied to a study performed by Carol Lee that utilized 3 different types of classroom instruction based on the idea of cultural scaffolding. Scaffolding looks at ways to give temporary support to students in order to facilitate and reinforce the learning process. The study implemented the local culture of each student group and resulted in significant learning achievements for the students. When I teach math in the near future, my plan of action will entail being very cognizant of my school's socio-political atmosphere so that I can determine what changes need to be made to ensure the educational process for my students is equitable. I plan to utilize a more progressive approach such that the students and I will be in constant dialogue on their educational process and progress. My daily check-in with the students will enable me to see how they are progressing and if there are any learning or understanding issues that require additional guidance. I also plan to apply Papert and Harrell's constructionism theory when teaching math because I can see how it would be very, very beneficial to the students. There is a deeper sense of learning when one is building something because you need to know the details about what is needed in order to build. Thus, the students will have a much better understanding of the lesson being taught.